Thank you, Ratnaprabha, again. I felt like a very kind and generous description of what could be coming next. So, and anything that is repeated, I think it bears repeating. So it's one of those things that actually it's difficult to really open ourselves up. It was a word I was using a lot in the meditation that I led you through just now. It's like, how do we stay open to things? You know, when it's joyful, when it's ecstatic. Well, for some of us, that's easier. Actually, it's not easy for everyone. It's strange. You know, one of the practices that Triratna still does, rejoicing in merits. It's interesting if you've ever been on the receiving end of that. Sometimes it's quite hard to stay open. So it's curious what we might want to withdraw or close down from. So why talk about suffering? Well, in one sense, it's because it was one of the things that the Buddha kept coming back to. It would be quite strange to be a Buddhist centre that never talked about dukkha and suffering and unsatisfactoriness. Hopefully by now, people have realised that Buddhists are actually quite cheerful and friendly on the whole. Yeah. So it's a really curious paradox, like that, can we be aware of suffering and dukkha? Well, what for? And to borrow a phrase from somebody else, Joanna Macy, this is going to be part of my experience of dukkha because I have a pile of notes rather than a well thought out talk. Where are you? There she is. So this is from Joanna Macy. The heart that breaks open can contain the whole universe. I think that word bears repeating. The heart that breaks open can contain the whole universe. So that came to mind for me when I was thinking about this, because there's something about when we are practicing that we are looking maybe for wisdom or insight, and we are also looking for compassion. We're also bearing with our own experience as it is. I think that one of the things that means that I struggled with when I first came across Buddhism was making it real, keeping it grounded. And there's something about actually, what's my actual experience? Yeah. And one of the very simple things that I think most people can relate to, maybe you just had it just now in the mindfulness of breathing, but I tend to suspect that people have it more when they do the metta bhavana. Is it kind of, yeah, what a wonderful idea, great, yes, let's do this really loving, heart-opening meditation. And then you sit there for 40 minutes and just feel very uncomfortable, or maybe something worse than that. Yeah. And at the same time, there might be part of you that's kind of going, a resonance, a kind of going, this is worth sticking with, this is worth hanging on there with. Something is going to change. But the experience could be really unsatisfactory, uncomfortable, not what you were expecting. It's usually a good indicator you're going in the right direction. Yeah, if everything's going the way you expected, it's probably not that alive. Yeah, life tends to take us in surprising directions. So I'm really going for the aspect of, in terms of the way I think of the three lakshanas, you can approach them as a set that are kind of pointing to the same thing. Yeah, I'm not going to explain that too much. Yeah, but I think if you get hold of one of the lakshanas, you've probably got hold of the other two at the same time. So it's going to be implicit in my talk that part of what's unsatisfactory is that things change and that they're connected with everything else. Yeah. Dukkha points to the experience of that. Yeah. If I can stay connected and grounded in my own experience, I can stay connected with others too. I can be in relationship. I think that's probably one of the most important things, just to be a happy, healthy human being. But I think it's also the basis of our spiritual practice is, am I connected to myself? Can I connect with others? So what did the Buddha say? And I'm going to be a bit cheeky about this because I'm going to use a bit of a conceit to get this going. So I've been, one of the things, as Ratnaprabha said, he was interested in what I might have to say as a therapist. So when I'm going to read this out, this is actually something that is part of the Pali Canon that we believe the Buddha said. I'm going to be sort of thinking about, well, what if this was a client who came down and sat opposite me for the first time and said, this is what I'm here for. This is my problem. This is what I want to talk about. Yeah. So these are the Buddha's words. What is the noble truth of suffering? Birth is suffering, age is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Association with the loathed is suffering, dissociation from the loved is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates, like all of this, affected by clinging, are suffering. Yeah. So there's something about our practice which resonates for me. Yeah, it's not dissimilar to somebody who sits down in a chair as a client. Yeah, this is going to be a long conversation. If somebody had a meaningful, satisfying response to this, yeah, or they could have that conversation with a friend over a cup of coffee over half an hour. Yeah, they wouldn't need to keep coming back and talking about this, thinking about it, exploring it. Yeah. So something that seemingly seems quite obvious arrives, and actually the first thing is to notice is like, oh, this is a long conversation. I'm not going to get an easy answer to this. This is going to be something that I keep coming back to. The other thing that's really apparent in that phrase is the big word, the one that's clearly got most of the meaning, the energetic impact, is suffering. That's what the problem is. That's what keeps coming back to. What's curious in terms of my craft, the way I practice, is my next questions would be, how is this not wrong? How is this experience that this person is having, that this person is struggling with, is not wrong? How is this necessary? Because if it wasn't necessary, you just get rid of it. But somehow this keeps coming around again because it's necessary. The other thing that came out of my toolkit that really reminded me is, how comes people so seldom wish to be the person they are? It's an interesting paradox, isn't it? When I think that there's a real overlap with spiritual practice here, is that quite often we turn up to our spiritual practice hoping we're going to be transformed into someone completely different, unrecognizable. It's like, get rid of the old me, I want the new one, this new person who I haven't met yet. I would hope that even if today was the first time you meditated, what's already dawning on you is practice is about being who you are. Really being interested in this person who is showing up, who is emerging, being open to this person, that I actually am. Paradoxically, the more we do that, the more we become this new person that we're hoping to meet. So the other phrase I wanted to drop in, and I think this is an apocryphal quote from Sangharakshita. Somebody else might be able to tell me where this is from, but I think it's in one of his memoirs when he talks about meeting his teachers while he's wandering around India before he's met any Buddhists. And somebody apparently said to him something like, the trouble in life isn't that we don't get what we want. The trouble in life is that we get what we want and everything that comes with it. So you might have reached for that person or that thing or that opportunity that looks really wonderful and juicy and exactly what you wanted, and then you notice all the connections that come with that, that need to be included. Some nods of recognition. So the problem starts to become one of including ourselves as fully as possible. What that means is the slip-ups, the mistakes, the difficulties. You're having trouble hearing me over the rain? So is that I would normally talk quite freely about things that are happening to me at the moment. I'm struggling to work out how to hold the boundaries around confidentiality. That's why I'm slowing down, because there are things that are coming to mind. I'm thinking, like, how do I talk about this? Okay, I think I can talk about this in this way. I suppose that recently I took on more responsibility in where I'm working at the moment. And one of the things that I very quickly noticed was that my idealism kicked in very strongly. Yeah, and other people had like a response to this idealism that I was going to be more collegiate, more kind of democratic, shall we say, in a sort of leadership role. And what became apparent was that while this was welcome, it created an awful lot of problems in the organisation. Yeah, that some of the things, that the amount of what would need to change in the organisation was possibly more than what people were willing to take on. And it really threw me back into being grounded in, oh yes, this is the work. This is the work of actually having to like put out an ideal out there and then really get into a conversation with people about the details of how it's going to happen and how it's going to be for them. Yeah. Something that I wanted and was very passionate about was actually a problem for other people in the organisation. Yeah. It wasn't that they were dismissing, to be really clear, they weren't dismissing what I was bringing and what I was offering. They just were really aware of all the problems and difficulties it would throw up for them. And one of the main issues is by really being willing to talk to other people, really being willing to sit down and put time and energy into finding out how is this going to be for someone else. What I experienced in that moment is, to quote someone else, is Iris Murdoch has this phrase, love is the awareness that other people are real. Yeah. I often have that experience when I start having my idealistic moments, is I'm kind of going, oh yes, I can see how this works. Yeah, I can see how it would be good for me and how I think it would be good for other people. And then as I start talking to people, it becomes really apparent, oh, this is the bit of you that I wasn't aware of. This is the bit I hadn't included. It wasn't necessarily that I was being manipulative or nasty. Yeah, it was just that I wasn't aware of something. And so in that moment, that person becomes more real. All those people become more real. And so quite often when we get stuck into a new idea, the image for me that often comes up to mind is I use tarot cards, is the fool stepping off the edge of a cliff. Yes, that quite often we have to be willing to step off the edge, yeah, with our ideals and find out what's going to happen. And it might be a bumpy ride on the way down, but it might also be completely wonderful as well. Yeah, the two aren't exclusive. It's like, is it worth finding out? In this case, it turned out that what I found out was that what I wanted to do wasn't going to work. So I had a very clear example of not getting what I wanted, yeah, which is what I'm digesting at the moment. Yeah. I've learned a great deal about myself through that experience, because it's like, what's at stake? What's at stake for me when I want something? Yeah. Now I've got to slow down again because I've said more than I meant to. Maybe just to invite you to notice, like when I say that, what do I want? Yeah, not getting what I want, is that there's a resonance there around getting in contact with your own identity, who I am as a person. Yeah. My experience was that actually I needed to mature more. I needed to grow up more, which is a strange thing to say at 49, but I think I'm probably going to still be saying it up until the last day of my life, my last breath, is that I needed to really get more grounded about how it was, yeah, that this was too much for other people to join in with, to accept. Yeah. I think it's fair to say that everyone is having an experience of life is becoming busier and more full, more stressful, that people have got less space to take on new projects and do things in a new way. I think that one of the difficulties about coming out of lockdown, yeah, it's strange. I still think some of us are coming out of lockdown. I think that some of us are still traumatized and still behaving as if we're not sure if it's okay to be outside and be with other people. Yeah. On some sense, a lot of us still experiencing some relief about being in a room together with other people. Yeah. But I think also what we're learning is that actually people have less capacity to take on new things and change things. I, for one, was disappointed at times that more didn't change during lockdown. I remember those times of, in a sense, it was extraordinarily difficult, extraordinarily painful. I also remember having time to go for a walk for 2-3 hours every day, and that being the highlight of the day. But actually, that the times that I was spending with my friends became very, very precious. That the contact and the small gestures that people made to stay in contact became very precious. And I was really excited about coming out of lockdown because I thought that that was going to be just carry on. Yeah. But what happened was people got very busy with their own lives, understandably, and actually there was less space, and a lot of the good stuff, I think, got forgotten. I think possibly one of the good things that's coming out of that is spaces like this where people are coming together. Yeah, that those of us who do want to learn something and hold on to those experiences in a good way, because we want to learn something from those experiences, are finding each other and are staying in connection. I think it's a very real experience that we share with each other of having suffered through something. So that kind of sense of connection and solidarity and having something in common, it's not just an idea, you've experienced it together. Everyone's experience of those 3 years will have been different, and an awful lot of the things that we struggled with and grappled with are the same. The texture, I really like that word, I don't know if that's been used, but that Sangharashta's description of the Lakshanas was the texture of reality. It's like the texture of something is there all the way through the experience. And this is what connects us. So strangely, in the midst of things that are difficult and troubling, actually we can find ourselves even more deeply in connection with ourselves and with others. It's not to make suffering a good thing or glorify it, it just is, that word necessary. For somehow, strangely, in this corner of the universe, suffering is necessary. We don't get to understand why. I don't think we do. I don't think we really get to understand why we're suffering. I think what we do get to do is have the experience, connect to our own experience, and connect to others. What more do I want to say? Yeah, I do want to include that. I notice myself flinching. It's like, is it all right to keep going? Is it all right to dig the hole even deeper? That's what I'm noticing as well as part of this. But you're still with me. Nobody's looking like they're going to leave, so I'll keep moving in this direction. It's interesting, isn't it? Like sometimes when we're having a conversation, and I really notice that as part of my craft, is that feeling of like, I feel like we need to lean into this more. I feel like I'm going to be dodging something or not really meeting you or not really connecting if I don't just lean in this direction. On the other hand, I think, God, I'm a sadist. Isn't that cruel to kind of keep going in that direction? Yeah. Like, why would we keep trying to have these difficult conversations, keep trying to go in this direction? And strangely, if I really stay alive to that feeling of this could hurt, it's strange how often I'm welcome. If I don't pretend it's not going to hurt, yeah. Actually, strangely, something, not me, not the other person, but something softens. And maybe we can talk about it a little bit more deeply. So, Sangharashta, I got this from the Essential Sangharashta, partly because I was trying to keep it simple as possible for me when I was looking for quotes. And also I liked the idea that the Essential Sangharashta Dharma would have something to say about this. So on his passage about dukkha that's in there, he gets into talking about subtle dukkha, which I think is important because this is the stuff that can kind of go under the radar, but can still really trip us up. So subtle dukkha includes, there's a whole list of what's subtle dukkha, but the one at the top, the number one, is something that is pleasant for oneself may involve suffering for other people, for other beings. We don't tend to consider this. But the unconscious mind is not so easily fooled. You can shut out an unpleasant fact from the conscious mind, but unconsciously you notice everything, and you forget nothing. You may never be consciously aware of the unpleasant fact, but it will exert an influence on your mental state that is all the more powerful for being unseen. In this way, we develop an irrational feeling of guilt, because in the depths of ourselves, we know that our own pleasure has been bought at the expense of the suffering of other living beings. This guilt is the source of a great deal of uneasiness and anxiety. So something I said earlier in the meditation, it's like we can measure this now. Your right brain, takes all the information in. There's no filter. Yeah, that's a trick that your left brain plays on you. Yeah. So all that information, all that experience, everything you've ever been around has gone in somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, if you're interested in researching the neurobiology and the psychology of it, it's interesting how we construct ourselves. Yeah. There's a pile of things we're not and a pile of things we are. Yeah. But it's all in there. It's all gone in there somewhere. What I would add to that is because of our culture around particularly consumerism, but I think consumerism as a philosophy as well. There is so much of this, our pleasures, yeah, our lifestyle, it's so much bound up with our identity. And when anything becomes a matter of our identity, my sense of self, it not only brings about a feeling of guilt, it brings about a feeling of shame. And I'm really noticing that in the spaces, in the small conversations, but when in the groups I am, that people are really grappling, not just with their guilt, but with their shame. Again, something that came really into everyone's experience, maybe implicitly rather than explicitly, was how interconnected we really are. There was something about being in London and noticing who was having to go to work and who was able to stay at home. Yeah, and knowing that when you went to the supermarket, someone, yeah, had got that food onto the shelf so that you could buy it. Yeah. Suddenly, some of us, and I was one of those people who was lucky enough to work from home in a relatively safe space, were very aware of all the people who were still taking risks so that I could carry on living the life I was living. Yeah, that wasn't just an idea, it was an experience. Yeah, there was an atmosphere. For me, there was something about running the gauntlet, about going into the supermarket, that made something really real. Yeah. And I also kind of was aware of colleagues and friends who were working still in public services, that they were going to work where they were relatively, well, not just relatively, they were at high risk for those first few months, certainly. So I think we've all become more aware. Yeah. And what I'm noticing is people are wanting, and I think it's happened the few times I've been here at the Buddhist Centre over the last few years as well, really noticing people want to talk about how we're interconnected with the whole world. Yeah. Now, I do think there are some tricky spots around. We still don't really understand how to have conversations when people have very different political ideals. Yeah. But what I am hearing is people really are hungry for a conversation about what do we do about this mess we're in? Because I don't think anybody's saying it's not a mess. I think we're much more aware of the fragility of our own lifestyles. Yeah, the supply chains. Yeah, we've all noticed that food is not so equally or not so freely available at the supermarket. The shock of seeing empty shelves. But I think also people are becoming more aware about what we could call, I think most people straightforwardly call it the global south. That actually there is a part of the world that is referred to as the global north that is benefiting from the exploitation and the extraction of the global south. And we're feeling that. It's not abstract anymore. I think if I'm really honest about it, 10 years ago, that felt very abstract. I'm not saying I wasn't bothered about it, yeah, but I would say that I'm feeling it, yeah, more. And I would say that that suffering is important. There is a question here about how comes we're not changing our behavior? It's an important question within the whole of the spiritual life. It's like, what's it going to take for me to actually change my behavior? Something being a good idea rarely changes our behavior. It might get us on the path, might get us started, it might be really important to have that idea to start a conversation, hear about going on retreat, all that sounds like a good idea, yeah? It's having the experience that actually makes it a practice, and that actually might change you and transform something. And Buddha field got mentioned. I'm pretty sure most of what I'm naming here, people would be wanting to talk about Buddha field. This is part of the conversation. So the reason I'm mentioning those things, I'm kind of just, yeah, this is, okay, you're still engaged, and I've got lots of time, so I'm going to keep going. So what I wanted to say about shame, yeah, I think shame rather than guilt. It's so difficult to talk while we're experiencing shame. It's something that we're having to learn to tolerate and experience more directly. if you want to learn to practice this in a context that's relevant, the most excruciating and useful context for me has been groups that are interested in what's broadly being called the race conversation. People who want to talk about difference and diversity and actually really undo what's going on here. How comes this is so hurtful? How comes this is so enduring? And what are we needing to do about it? As a white person, what is often reflected back to me is it's a mixture of, on the one hand, needing to be accountable, but not drowning in my shame, because I'm not very useful, not very interesting to talk to, if I'm drowning in my shame. One of the phrases that I find useful is from Bell Hooks. All failures of love are shameful. And I think connecting it with love really supports me to stay interested and get curious. But actually what's starting to happen is that when I experience shame, what I'm noticing is, I could love more. That doesn't make it any more pleasant to experience, but what it means is it starts to be a gatekeeper. It starts to be a warning bell or an indicator, is that there's an opportunity here. I really like the word optimism. Is that if I start to notice that I'm feeling shameful about something or ashamed, then actually part of my identity is at stake. And then I can get really interested in, who do I want to be? Who do I want to give my time and energy to? What kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be someone who is trying to connect, trying to be more kind, more loving, more generous? I also think there's something really important about owning our ancestral griefs, in different ways. That came up when I was suggesting about the 5 gates of grief. That some of the trouble isn't necessarily to do with here and now, it's to do with what's happened in the past. I would not be sitting here if everything that happened in the past hadn't happened. That includes the very difficult, traumatizing aspects of history. I'm not a historian, I'm not going to spend all of my time researching everything that's ever happened. But I do live in a culture where it's very easy to pick up half a dozen books or watch a few documentaries and become educated about what's gone on in a way that's real. What I would say the benefit of that is that I can be more honest with myself about why certain conversations are difficult and why it's important that I show up and don't shy away from them. I also say that actually it's made more sense of why sometimes I feel distressed, why I feel stuck, why I feel I don't know how to talk about something. And that has improved my capacity to connect with everyone as well as myself. I don't want to say anything about that. Feels like there's something else to mention about that. I'm aware, that's maybe what I'm saying is I'm aware that there might be questions coming up. I am going to leave time for questions. Maybe I don't. That's because I've said a lot of this already. That's why I'm okay. What did I want to include? Okay, yeah. So wanted to include an image that's not actually from Buddhism, and I wanted to. I've got some poems that I think. It's always good to finish with a poem, and then there'll be some time for some questions. So the image again, I mentioned about the archetypal set of the tarot cards. You don't need to understand them; it's just the image, that I'm referring to. So it's like, the image is a card called the 5 of Cups, which is sometimes also referred to as disappointment. And in this image, there is somebody standing there, and they're looking in front of them. There are 3 cups that have been knocked over. And it's clearly what's been in the cups has been spilled and is now on the floor. And this person has got their shoulders hunched, and they're kind of dressed in black, and they're kind of either grieving and or sulking. They're clearly not happy. Behind them, there are two cups still standing up. Yeah, but they're so lost in their grief that they can't see what's still standing up behind them. Something about, there's lots of different ways to approach practicing with dukkha, but this for me holds a sense of keeping it real while also staying optimistic. Yeah. Sometimes it's just too soon. Again, thinking about my craft and my experience, sometimes it's just too soon to turn around and look at the two cups that's still standing up. Yeah, like I say, there was a period, saying with the examples I've used already, there was a period for me when I came out of lockdown where actually the first thing I noticed was, yes, I really want to rush out there and meet people, but actually I needed to still grieve or actually even sulk a bit. There was all sorts of difficult responses I was having to this experience. And strangely, when we were given permission to go back out there and get back to normal, I had these other responses that I needed to grieve fully. Yeah, actually a wave of how angry I'd been, how frustrated I'd been came through, and also how frightened I'd been. It was like I couldn't really feel it until somebody opened the door. Yeah, and actually to go out and rush into meeting people and connecting with people, it wouldn't have been real. In fact, I think actually it would have been very difficult for me and for them. Yeah, so I think different people have had a different sort of amount of time they've needed to be with the fact that the cups are knocked over and spilled on the floor. Yeah. I would also say there's something about when you do turn around and realize there are two cups. Yes, that is less, but my experience of that was it was so much more precious for still being there. I noticed that I really wanted to be protective of those connections that I wanted to keep alive and those opportunities that were really precious to me. So even if there was less opportunity to meet up with people and do things, I knew what I was fighting for. I knew what I was protecting. I knew what I was prioritizing. I think the reason I'm saying this, I know the reason I'm saying is because I don't think we're going to have another lockdown. But I think there is something about how the way things are going, I think we are going to notice more and more cups being knocked over. Things that we dearly, dearly cherish, that we are not going to be able to hold on to as things change over the coming decades. Some of us already, so it's interesting, I really notice amongst my friends and colleagues, the people who stay informed and know how much has already been lost. My response is I really have to titrate myself. What I mean by that is a little bit of something when I'm able to. I've got some sense of what's going on in terms of biodiversity loss. I've got some sense of what's going on economically in the world. But I know there's a certain point where I just shut down because it's too overwhelming. Because we need to do that. We need to take care of ourselves. We can only bear so much reality. It's a T.S. Eliot quote, isn't it? But rather than being cruel about that, actually a little bit at a time, and the information will go in enough. Yeah. And I think, as terrible as it might get, I do think there will still be one or two cups still standing up. And the question becomes, the work becomes, is what do you want to do with that? How do you want to show up for that? Yeah. Whether that's here at a place like a Buddhist centre, at North London Buddhist Centre, there might equally be other things that you want to show up for and make sure that those precious things are protected and given the time and energy they need to carry on being in the world. I wanted to include an example from the other than humans, to use that language. This is a sad story with an extraordinary thread of optimism in it for me. So this is a trauma, sort of spoiler alert, but this is a story of trauma. Yeah. So a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, has a dog, and the dog is very precious to him. And I have been able to get to know this dog quite well over time. Been very close to the dog as well as him. And very, very sadly, about a year and a half ago, this dog was attacked by a bunch of other dogs and lost one of its legs. And this was devastating for him and his partner, and for a lot of people who knew the dog. Yeah. what was extraordinary for me around this, and as upset as I was, and he was far more upset, understandably, when we met this dog, it was like, yeah, I've got 3 legs, I'm fine. It was a profound teaching in an other than human response to something that was deeply, it was clear that this dog, she had been through something absolutely awful. It wasn't like that wasn't the case. But in a strange kind of way for her, what was confusing about was all these sad, upset, angry humans who couldn't understand that it was all right now. Yeah. There's something in there about our response as humans. It's not wrong, but it is different. I think it's going to be really important that we have a very human response to what's coming, what is happening and what is coming. Yeah. But I think it's also very important for us to be aware and alive to the other than human response. Oh. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh about that at that moment. That was right. Okay, I'm laughing not because of the story I'm telling, but because the time on this clock is running and I've run out of time. Maybe I can leave it there.